The moment his hand struck my face, the entire ballroom went silent. Not a whisper, not a single breath. 500 guests frozen in place. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above us, casting golden light across a room that had been filled with laughter just seconds before. Cameras were rolling, capturing every moment of what was supposed to be my daughter's perfect wedding day. And in the center of it all, my son-in-law had just slapped me. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Sharp, humiliating, final. A wave of gasps spread through the crowd like a shockwave. My cheek burned instantly, but it wasn't the pain that shook me. It was what I saw when I lifted my eyes. Olivia, my daughter, stood right beside him, completely still. Her lips parted slightly, her body tense, but she didn't move.
She didn't speak.
She didn't defend me. She didn't even step forward. In that moment, surrounded by hundreds of people, I felt something far worse than embarrassment. I felt abandoned. What none of those guests knew, not Jason, not his parents, not the friends whispering behind their hands, was that the woman he had just humiliated was the same woman who made this entire wedding possible. Every table, every plate, every bottle of champagne being poured that very second, all of it had been paid for quietly, carefully by me. Months of planning, years of sacrifice. And Jason? He had no idea. But what he really didn't know was that the truth about who he really was, the truth he had worked so hard to hide, was only minutes away from being exposed. And when it came out, this wedding wouldn't just be ruined. It would be destroyed. CTA. So tell me, what would you do if someone slapped you in front of 500 people at your own daughter's wedding? Would you stay quiet to protect the moment? Or would you tear everything down right there in front of everyone? Backhand index pointing down, comment your choice below. I want to know exactly what you'd do, because what happened next, no one in that room was prepared for. My name is Brenda Clark. I'm 61 years old. And if you had asked anyone who knew me before that night, they would have told you one thing. I was strong. Not the loud kind of strong. Not the kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind, the kind that survives. Because everything I had in life, I built after losing everything. Years ago, my world looked very different. I had a husband who made me laugh even on my worst days. A home filled with warmth. A future that felt certain. Michael Clark wasn't just my partner. He was the foundation of everything I believed my life would be. He had this steady presence, the kind that made problems feel smaller the moment he walked into a room. And when he talked about the future, he didn't just dream, he planned. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had enough. And more importantly, we had each other. Until one night that all changed. It was December. Snow covered the roads. And with a single phone call, my life split into two parts. Before Michael, and after. The accident took him instantly. No goodbye. No warning. Just silence where his voice used to be. Our daughter Olivia was only 12 years old. I still remember the way she held onto my coat in the hospital hallway, her small fingers gripping tightly, as if letting go would make everything real. She looked up at me, searching my face for reassurance I didn't have the strength to give. That was the moment I understood something terrifying. I couldn't fall apart, because if I did, she would too. So I didn't. Michael had owned a small freight logistics business. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept our lives stable. After he died, that responsibility became mine. Not because I wanted it, because there was no one else. At first, I was completely overwhelmed. I didn't know how to run a company. I didn't know how to negotiate contracts. I didn't know how to lead people who had more experience than I did. All I knew was that failure wasn't an option. So I learned. The hard way. Long nights turned into longer ones. Mistakes became lessons I couldn't afford to repeat. I studied contracts until the words blurred together. There were nights I stayed at the office, sleeping on a worn couch because going home felt too quiet, too empty without Michael. Grief doesn't just disappear. It lingers in silence. But every morning, Olivia would come downstairs, ready for school, and before she walked out the door, she would hug me. That hug grounded me. reminded me why I had to keep going. Years passed. Slowly, things began to shift. One contract turned into two. Two turned into steady business. What started as survival became growth. And eventually success. Clark Freight Logistics became something real. Something stable. Something I could be proud of. But even then, the business was never my greatest achievement. Olivia was. She grew into someone remarkable.
Smart. Kind.
Driven. She carried a quiet strength that reminded me so much of her father. It would catch me off guard sometimes. She studied architecture, pouring herself into every design like it mattered. And when she talked about the future, her eyes lit up the same way Michael's used to. For a while, I believed I had done it. I had protected her, given her a life where she wouldn't have to struggle the way I did. But life doesn't test you when you're weak. It waits until you think everything is finally okay. Because the night Olivia called me and said, "Mom, I met someone," I smiled. I remember smiling, because I thought it was the beginning of her happiness. I had no idea. It was the beginning of everything falling apart. It all started with a phone call. "Mom," Olivia's voice trembled with excitement. "I met someone. I really like him." That tone, the one reserved for moments of true happiness, made my chest tighten with hope. For a mother, hearing your child's joy is enough to make you believe the world is right. I smiled, listened, nodded, even though she couldn't see me. She described Jason Whitmore with words that flowed like poetry. Ambitious, confident, brilliant. A young entrepreneur who dreamed bigger than anyone she had ever met. Listening to her gush, I felt proud of my daughter for recognizing ambition, for wanting someone who inspired her. Yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, a tiny spark of unease flickered. Not from what Jason had done, but from what he was. Olivia kept emphasizing how much he would achieve, how successful he would become. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. And when something is too perfect, it often hides the cracks beneath the surface. I pushed the thought aside. "Bring him to dinner sometime." "I'd love to meet him," I told her. Olivia's laugh was light, excited. "I was hoping you'd say that," she exclaimed. And so, a week later, the meeting was set. The restaurant Olivia chose was one of those places that feels timeless. Dark wood panels, soft jazz drifting through the air, the subtle scent of grilled steaks and wine. Jason liked it, she explained, because it reminded him of the high-end dining experiences he'd have when meeting investors. I took a deep breath, knowing that tonight would be my first glimpse at the man my daughter might spend her life with. I prepared carefully. A navy blue dress, simple but elegant. A silver necklace Michael had given me, worn whenever I needed courage. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to see clearly, to gauge this man without bias. Olivia waved from the corner table, and there he was. Jason Whitmore. Taller than I had imagined, his dark hair perfectly styled, his posture commanding yet natural. "Mrs. Clark," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." Everything about him was polished. Firm handshake, confident smile, flawless etiquette. On the surface, a perfect gentleman. I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this would be easy. Maybe he truly was the kind of man a mother could trust her daughter with. But as the evening unfolded, I noticed subtle signs that set off a quiet alarm. Every glance he cast, every gesture he made, was aimed at Olivia. His focus never wavered. When he spoke to me, it was polite, but distant. Almost mechanical. His words were courteous, but they lacked warmth, curiosity, genuine interest. I found myself observing him more than listening, noting the tiny cracks in his flawless exterior. He laughed easily, but only when Olivia spoke. Every compliment he gave, every praise he offered, seemed carefully calculated to impress her. He never asked about me, my life, the woman who had raised the remarkable young lady sitting beside him. And yet, he could be charming. Too charming. A practiced smile that could disarm even the most wary. The kind of charm that hides intentions. Dinner passed. Jason ordered the most expensive steak, insisting we try it. "When you celebrate something good, you shouldn't hold back," he said, smiling at Olivia. His charm, smooth as silk, was magnetic, but directed entirely at her. I nodded, aware of the tension building quietly in my chest. I started noticing little things that gnawed at my instincts. How his eyes followed Olivia's movements with laser focus. How his expressions mirrored hers. How he subtly dismissed my words, acknowledging me only with a nod or a polite smile. Never engagement. I reminded myself that he was a young man in love. Perhaps this was normal. Perhaps I was being overly cautious. And yet, the small voice in my mind whispered, insistent, unrelenting, watch him closely. Not everything is what it seems. By the end of the meal, Olivia glowed with happiness. Her eyes sparkled with admiration, with hope, with love. And I, a mother who had lived through loss, success, and sacrifice, felt that protective instinct flare. I knew, without a doubt, that my vigilance would be tested. That the man my daughter adored might not be the man he seemed. That charm and ambition often hide deeper shadows. And that shadow would soon reach out in ways I could never imagine, leading us to a night that would leave my cheeks stinging and my heart breaking in front of 500 witnesses. Backhand index pointing down CTA. If you notice subtle warning signs about someone close to you, would you speak up or wait to see for yourself? Comment below. I read every reply. After that dinner, the unease never left me. At first, it was subtle. Jason was polite, charming, and undeniably ambitious, exactly the kind of man who could make a young woman's heart soar. Olivia gushed about him constantly. She hung on his every word. Her laughter followed him like a melody I couldn't quite place, beautiful, yet slightly unsettling. But I began noticing small things that didn't add up. The way he always talked about what he would do, never what he had done. Every story he told of his past, his successes, seemed rehearsed. It was like he was auditioning for someone's approval, and it wasn't mine. He never asked about my daughter's life in detail. He complimented her brilliance, but only to reflect on how it might benefit him. Every gesture, every word, was meticulously calculated. Even more concerning, he subtly tested boundaries. When we went to family dinners, he would comment on finances in front of Olivia casually. Not asking, not curious, stating as if it were fact that he was entitled to know or control. I saw the way Olivia tensed, laughed nervously, and nodded, trying not to argue. And though he smiled, it was not warm. It was sharp, precise, a predator disguised in a suit. One afternoon, Olivia and I were reviewing wedding plans over tea. I could see her excitement, but also fatigue. Jason had started making subtle demands. Shouldn't we upgrade the centerpieces? The flowers? Don't you want everything to reflect our status? At first, it sounded innocent, almost reasonable. But it wasn't. It was a quiet push, an attempt to influence the narrative of her life, to steer it his way. My instinct told me something was wrong, and it gnawed at me day and night. He had charm, ambition, and wit, but also control. And control, I knew, could easily turn into something much darker. Then came the moments that made my heart tighten. He would make subtle jabs at me, questions, comments, almost jokes, about my involvement in Olivia's life. Does she always let you pick her friends? Or what she wears? He asked once during a casual conversation. The tone was friendly, light, but the meaning was clear. He wanted her to be his alone, and to quietly push me out of the picture. Olivia didn't notice. Or maybe she refused to. Love can blind us to red flags. She saw only his brilliance, his attention, his ability to make her feel admired. Meanwhile, I watched, observed, documented. Every smile, every word, every subtle manipulation. Because mothers have instincts honed over decades, instincts that scream before your eyes can see. And yet, despite my suspicion, there was a part of me that wanted to believe. A part that wanted to trust my daughter's judgment. She had always been careful with men. She had always been discerning. Maybe this time she was right. Maybe he truly was as good as he seemed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the shadow. A shadow that whispered, charm can be a mask. Ambition can hide obsession. And love can be used as a weapon. It wasn't just the manipulation I feared. It was the arrogance. Jason carried himself like someone entitled to more than just happiness. He was entitled to influence, to power, to control. And I knew, in my bones, that this entitlement would eventually collide with reality. By the time the wedding invitations were sent, the tension was palpable, though invisible to everyone else. I was the quiet observer, carrying a secret burden. I had invested everything, not just money, but my time, my energy, my heart, into making Olivia's wedding perfect. A celebration of love, hope, and triumph over adversity. And yet, the man standing at the center of this event, the one my daughter had chosen, had no idea that the very hands he planned to dominate and control were the hands that had funded it all. The collision course had begun. Every planning meeting, every tiny request, every carefully worded suggestion from him, it was building. A slow crescendo of arrogance, manipulation, and ignorance. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, when the day came, when the vows were said, and the cameras rolled, something would break. Something big. Something public. Something unforgettable. Because Jason Whitmore wasn't just ambitious. He was blind to the consequences of his actions. And I had been watching, waiting, preparing. The day of the wedding arrived like a storm on the horizon. Every detail had been meticulously planned. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light over tables draped in ivory linens. The flowers were arranged just as Olivia had dreamed. Candles flickered softly, casting romantic shadows over the ballroom. Every single element, from the grand piano at the corner to the champagne flutes waiting on each table, was funded by me. Every penny I had saved over years of sacrifice, late nights, and relentless work was now on display, glimmering under the chandeliers. And yet, despite the beauty, I couldn't shake the gnawing tension that had been building for months. Jason had been acting differently all morning. Subtle microaggressions, veiled impatience, and a growing sense of entitlement clung to him like a shadow. My motherly instinct screamed at me, but I had to remain composed. Olivia's day, her dream, had to be protected. As the guests arrived, the atmosphere shimmered with excitement. Friends, family, colleagues, nearly 500 people had gathered to celebrate a love story that, to them, seemed perfect. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, laughter echoed through the room. And then the moment came. Jason approached me in a way that seemed casual, but there was a tension in his posture I hadn't noticed before. His voice was sharp, just above a whisper. "Mom, don't stand in the way." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice calm, but my heart racing. "Just don't make things difficult today." "Olivia's stressed," he said, brushing past me. It wasn't a warning.
It was a command.
And I knew it. By the time the ceremony began, the air had grown thick. Guests sat quietly, unaware of the silent war unfolding behind the smiles and pleasantries. I watched Jason carefully, noting every gesture, every interaction, every tiny expression that betrayed his impatience with my presence. Then it happened. A small disagreement over the seating arrangements. A minor clash of opinions about the music. Nothing extraordinary, but to Jason, it was enough. I hadn't said more than a few polite words, but apparently my presence, my authority as the one who had given him this entire event, provoked something in him he couldn't control. Before I could comprehend it, his hand struck my cheek. A sharp, humiliating slap that reverberated through the grand ballroom. Cameras flashed. Guests gasped. 500 eyes turned toward me. Pain exploded across my face, but it wasn't physical alone. My chest tightened with disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. My daughter's eyes, wide, stunned, conflicted, met mine. She didn't move.
She didn't speak.
She froze. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers began to circulate. What had just happened? Why would a groom strike the mother of the bride? And there it was, the truth he didn't know. Every single detail of this wedding, every beautiful flower, every table, every sparkling light had been made possible because of me. He didn't know it. He couldn't have imagined it. And yet, he had the audacity to humiliate me publicly. In that split second, I realized this was no longer about charm, ambition, or appearance. This was about arrogance meeting consequence. I took a deep breath, steadying myself while feeling the sting on my cheek. My mind raced. Every lesson from years of struggle, every ounce of patience, every skill I had honed in the business world, it all crystallized in that moment. I knew the story wasn't over. There was still truth to reveal. Secrets that could shatter his carefully constructed image. Secrets that, if exposed, would force the world to see him as I saw him, entitled, reckless, and completely unaware of the reality he had benefited from. And I would decide how, when, and where that truth would come out. Because in life, every action has a price. Every arrogance carries a consequence. And the price Jason Whitmore would pay for this moment was about to be revealed. Backhand index pointing down CTA. If someone humiliated you publicly, especially someone close, how would you respond? Fight back immediately, or wait for the right moment? Comment below. I want to hear your choice before the next part of this story. The ballroom was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, making every heartbeat echo loudly. Jason's hand still burned against my cheek, but the real sting was the shock radiating from every corner of the room. 500 guests, all witnesses to a humiliation that should never have happened, stared in disbelief. Olivia stood frozen beside him. Her eyes flicked between me and Jason, confusion and hurt warring in her gaze. And then, slowly, the realization of what had happened began to settle in, how utterly unaware Jason was of the life that had made this day possible. I straightened, keeping my voice calm, measured, though my chest pounded with a mix of anger and grief. Jason Whitmore, I said, letting each word carry the weight of truth. Do you realize that every single detail of this wedding, the flowers, the lights, the tables, the champagne, is because of me? A ripple went through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. Whispers filled the grand room like a rising tide. Jason's face paled. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words, no defenses, no rehearsed charm to cover this moment. I continued. You struck me in front of 500 people, without knowing that I funded this celebration, without knowing the sacrifices I made to ensure my daughter's day was perfect. And yet you acted as if you were entitled to do whatever you pleased. Jason's lips quivered, but no apology came. His hands clenched at his sides. He had been exposed, not just in front of my family, but before every guest who had come to celebrate love. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Mom, she whispered, finally moving toward me. But I held up a hand. She needed to see, to understand, that this was bigger than a single slap. This was about character, about respect, about the foundation of the life she was about to build. I took a deep breath, letting the truth hang in the air. Jason, everything you see here, the beauty, the love, the effort, came from years of struggle, work, and sacrifice. And it was my choice to give this to my daughter. Not your ambition.
Not your charm.
Mine. He finally found his voice, a small, stammering attempt at defense. I didn't know. You didn't know? I cut in sharply. Jason, that is the problem. You don't know. You never saw beyond what you wanted. You assumed entitlement over love. You assumed control over respect. And today, everyone saw it. The room was tense. Guests shifted in their seats, sensing the shift from celebration to confrontation. Yet amidst the chaos, I felt a strange sense of power, not arrogance, but clarity. This was not about revenge. This was about revealing truth, about showing my daughter what respect and sacrifice truly look like. Jason's mask had fallen. His charm had crumbled. His confidence faltered. And in that moment, Olivia saw him. Not the man she had imagined, but the man he truly was. Tears ran down her face, and she grabbed my hand. Mom, thank you, she whispered.
For everything.
For protecting me, even when I couldn't see it. I smiled softly, holding her close. My heart still ached from the slap, from the betrayal, but there was also relief. My daughter had clarity. She had truth. And now, she could make her own choice, armed with knowledge, not illusions. As for Jason, he left the room shortly after, head hung low, dignity in shreds, the weight of consequences settling heavily on him. The wedding went on, quietly, calmly, with love and laughter returning, though shadowed by the lessons learned that day. Guests whispered among themselves, many coming up to me privately to express admiration, respect, and shock. And in the quiet afterward, I reflected on everything that had brought us here, the sacrifices, the struggles, the silent battles fought behind closed doors. Every decision, every choice, every act of patience had led to this moment of truth. Life had a way of revealing people for who they truly were. And sometimes, those revelations happen in the most public, unavoidable ways. Because in the end, every choice has a price. Every arrogance carries a consequence. And every decision we make, especially those made in ignorance or entitlement, will find its reckoning. Backhand index pointing down CTA number 5, final. If you were in my shoes, would you have revealed the truth publicly or handled it privately? Comment your choice below. And if this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell. You won't want to miss the next story where every decision can change a life or destroy it.